At SD Bullion, our everyday low prices are already lower than the big boys' so-called flash sales. One of the fastest growing bullion companies in the country, SD Bullion, just claimed a spot on the prestigious Inc. 500. So you have to ask yourself, why haven't you joined over 30,000 new customers who've recently made the switch to SD Bullion for the lowest gold, silver, and platinum bullion prices? To learn more, go to www.sdbullion.com and enjoy the lowest prices in the precious metals industry, period.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with SilverDoctors.com, and with us today is David Kranzler from Investment Research Dynamics blog. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Elijah. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, well, I'd first like to discuss a little bit about this quote-unquote fake news. There's this story, going around in the mainstream media. The Washington Post recently had an article about it that, watch out for these fake news websites, and it cited this report from an organization called Prop or Not, and that organization has compiled a list of 200 websites that supposedly echo Russian propaganda. And actually, this one of the websites, your website, you actually had the honor of being on that list.
Yes. I think it's interesting that the Washington Post featured it because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, the Amazon.com founder and CEO. And he's part of the government now. A lot of people don't know that. He was appointed to it's called the Defense Innovation Advisory Board. He was appointed in July. And not coincidentally, the chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, is the chairman of this Defense Advisory Board. So what they've got is a bunch of private sector billionaires who have been made part of this Defense Advisory Board. And it has the charge of identifying innovative private sector practices and technological solutions that the Department of Defense can employ in the future. And it's clearly a deep state operation, and it's kind of, I believe that it's akin to the thought police that Orwell wrote about in 1984, his book 1984. So it really, what it is it's this thing that's out there that I think they're trying to figure out ways of behavior modification and to sort of figure out ways to control people's thoughts through, to me, the biggest tool to try and control the public's thought is propaganda. And therefore, that's why the whole thing during the election about the Russians infiltrating and helping rig the elections, blah blah blah. I mean, that's just a propaganda ploy, and it's the same thing as the Red Scare that occurred in the 50s with Senator Joseph McCarthy and the McCarthy hearings, and they're trying to paint Russia as the big bad enemy, and I think a lot of people probably fear the idea of Russia being powerful, but not as much as the deep state people who control the government, because, at the end of the day, Russia and China, and Russia and China combined are taking away from the U.S. being the sole ruler of the world, so to speak. And Russia and China have reintroduced the idea of a bipolar world where you've got more than one all-powerful nation. So it's just natural that the government's going to try and smear them and make the public, give the public reason to want to engage with Russia militarily. And I think that's a big part of what's behind this push that we saw that's trying to paint Russia and Putin as the bad guy. And so what better way to discredit blogs out there and alternative media websites like mine that are trying to present the truth out there and try and and get the truth out for people to see and evaluate versus what they're being fed in the mainstream media. So this prop or not thing is just it's really just the rebirth of the Red Scare in the 50s, where they're trying to, make people think that all these blogs and websites that were listed in the prop or not 200 list are really tools of Russian propaganda, and it's just insane. And what I found the most insane about it is the fact that David Stockman and Dr. Paul Craig Roberts' websites were on the list, and it's like, you got to be kidding me, seriously? I mean, these guys, they're probably as big of true patriots as there are out there, and they were high-level Reagan administration and cabinet officials. They've been very active in government life and government service, and trying to make this country a better place to live for everyone. And here they are, they're being smeared by Jeff Bezos' Washington Post. I mean, it's just outright absurd.
And I just noticed the Ron Paul Institute is on there as well.
There you go. I mean, I don't think there's anyone out there who's been more vocal and obviously critical about the way the government and the Federal Reserve is the policies being promoted by the government and the Federal Reserve. And he's a guy who probably cares more about this country than any single person in that government right now.
So I know in an article you recently wrote, you said that this is basically a slippery slope towards totalitarianism. Can you discuss this?
Sure. I mean, I've had. I'm not alone in this idea. I've tried to contribute to the body of work that's out there that are trying to bring people to the attention that everything the government's been doing, especially since 9/11, with the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security Act. It was originally called the detainee bill, but it was essentially a bill that allows the government to arrest anyone. Originally, it was only pointed at non-U.S. foreign nationals or foreigners, outsiders even, who they considered were threats to the U.S. government. But now it incorporates citizens of the United States, where they can detain you without a judicial hearing. And I mean, that's a basic fundamental tenet of democracy, that if you get accused of a wrongdoing, you're entitled to a hearing in front of a judge, and they've taken that right away. And to me, it's been a long creep towards imposing a totalitarian government on our system. And you can actually trace the roots back to the founding of the IRS. There was a guy named Aaron Russo, who was he was actually a Hollywood producer, but he was also a prominent political and economic activist, a very, very bright guy. And unfortunately, he passed away from some sort of cancer in the mid-2000s. I want to say around 2005 or 2006. And he put out about an hour-and-a-half video documentary. You can get it on YouTube, and it's called From Freedom to Fascism. And he goes through, how the establishment of the IRS was really part of this movement of totalitarian creep that's been, and these are, if the guys who are controlling the system want to affect a long-term permanent change and basically take away everything that the Constitution gave to the citizens of the country, they got to do it over a long period of time and make it happen in a way that people don't realize it's happening. And that's part of what this is it's, now they're trying to transform this country into a complete military state, the war on terror. And a lot of these are illegal wars. They don't even have, that they were never signed off on by Congress, which is also part of the Constitution. Congress has to approve any military engagements that we embark on, and the use of executive orders. If people recall, during the 2008 presidential campaign, one of Obama's primary tenets was that he was going to get rid of the use of executive orders. Well, I don't think he's quite signed as many as W signed, but he's been the most second active user of the executive order. And what that does is it basically lets the lets the executive branch of government usurp any kind of power that Congress has, or any kind of control Congress has over what types of policies the government can implement. And it's just, again, it's just a slow creep towards a totalitarian system.
Now, the irony that I kind of see is that this idea that the Russian government was trying to influence the election and that kind of narrative, it's like, wait a second, shouldn't we be looking at the media in the United States? Shouldn't we be scrutinizing them as well? I mean, they were so biased and for Clinton. It's crazy that they're now complaining, oh, someone else was trying to influence the election when they were trying to influence the election. I mean, it's just obvious to me. The mainstream media was trying to influence the election.
That's right, and that's a great point, because the best defense is a good offense. So the best way to deflect all the criticism out there, and all these websites that are on that list, they were all, including mine, were writing articles about how biased the mainstream media was, and the tactics the mainstream media was trying to do to rally support around Clinton. And so you're right, it was obvious. It was in your face obvious. And I think that's part of the reason people didn't vote for Hillary, is because they saw what was going on. But the best way to deflect that criticism is to turn it around and accuse these websites who are trying to put the truth out there, accuse them of being, Russian tools of propaganda. And the whole thing is insane. And it really, for people who haven't read 1984, go read 1984 or reread it. I've read it at least twice. And it's right out of Orwell's playbook, what this government's doing right now, in conjunction with the media and corporate America. And that actually brings up a good point, because I forgot about this until yesterday, but we probably at some point are going to start seeing people write about it. But the actual true definition of, with fascism, people think of all-controlling, iron-fisted ruler. But the true definition of fascism is when you have the corporations and the governments fusing into one entity. And so, I mean, part of the role of government is to try and regulate and monitor the private sector, and keep the private sector from destroying itself. And I'm not a big government regulator advocate at all. I'm more of a libertarian. But when you have corporate interests and government interests all fused into one, and you see that, a perfect example is this Defense Advisory Board that Bezos is on, and that Eric Schmidt is the chairman of. They're on that board so that they can influence government policy, and not only that, influence government policy in a way that throws business to their business interests. And that's the definition of fascism. And that's what we've got right now in this country. It's not a democracy at all.
So I know, Trump ran his campaign on, being anti-establishment, saying that the media was completely biased. And do you think he'll actually follow through on some of the promises to, quote, drain the swamp in Washington, really get this corruption out of the system? It seems like right now, in some ways, he's kind of trying to work in the system. He's thinking of having Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. He's saying that, well, I don't really know if I want to prosecute the Clintons anymore, or Hillary Clinton anymore, because, they're good people. And it seems like he's changing his tone a little bit. What are your thoughts? Do you think he will actually follow through on some of the promises about, draining the swamp that he made in his campaign?
No, not at all. And I actually wrote about that. I said before the election he probably won't drain the swamp. It was a nice catch slogan that he threw into his campaign in the last couple weeks. And I think it helped him get some votes, because I think it touched a nerve with people. Like, yeah, you're right. Maybe this guy is going to finally do something for the little people. And you see his appointments. And just yesterday he announced appointing Wilbur Ross, I think he's Commerce Secretary, and this guy Steve Mnuchin, which no one outside of Wall Street would have heard of until now, but I heard of him. In fact, I worked at Goldman Sachs when his father, Robert Mnuchin, was a partner there. Goldman Sachs was still private at the time. He was head of the equity area. And Steve Mnuchin worked at Goldman, made millions, and then he went and worked for Soros. So, And Soros is the guy who was one of the main financiers of the Hillary Clinton campaign. So no, Trump's not going to drain the swamp. He's just going to put in the type of swamp monster that is more amenable to the people who were influential in getting him into the Oval Office. So, and some of these guys are regurgitated from the Bush administration. Wilbur Ross, a lot of people probably haven't heard of him or know much about him, but if you worked on Wall Street, you know exactly who he is. He's not a good guy, and he was one of these guys who popularized the term vulture investing and would go in and companies, especially a lot of the Drexel companies that blew up on junk debt, he would go in there and buy them for fractions of a penny on a dollar and turn them around and take them public. And he made an absolute fortune that way. But he is not a good guy. And I don't remember exactly what his role was in the Bush administration before Obama, but he was pretty active in it. And so it's just a regurgitation of the same names. I mean, obviously Romney ran for president and lost. I don't know why Romney they would even think about him for Secretary of State. I have no clue what his qualifications would be, but it's just going to be out. I wrote a blog post, out with the old, in with the new old, and that's what Trump's going to be, I guess. And actually, I stole this from James Kranzler, who wrote an article right after the election, and he had the phrase in there. The good news is Hillary lost. The bad news is Trump won, and that's summarizes my view on the matter.
So, what was your perspective on the market's reaction after the election? I mean, obviously, when there was that first shock, gold went up and the stock futures went down. But then, right in the morning, and ever since then, gold has been going down, and the Dow and the stock market has been going up. The Dow's now at all new highs. It's above 19,000 points. What is your perspective on the market's reaction?
Amazing how that reaction happened, isn't it? Especially, before the election, everyone said, oh no, it was like Brexit. Oh no, Trump gets elected, the Dow's going to go down 1,000 points and gold's going to go to the moon. And, the Trump election was supposed to be bad for the economy, and the Clinton election was supposed to be good for the economy and good for the market. And I was watching the futures, and even before Trump was declared the winner, but when it was kind of obvious that he had won the election, all of a sudden, the Dow futures were down 1,000 points at one point, and all of a sudden they started roaring back furiously, and gold was up $80 or maybe even $85 at one point, and even before Trump was declared the winner, gold had already started selling off, and I can guarantee you this was all intentional. It wasn't going to matter who got elected. They were going to slam gold because a rising price of gold it signals to everyone who pays attention to the markets that something bad is going on, and they were going to push the stock market as high as possible, because there's a direct correlation between the direction of the stock market and consumer sentiment. There's been studies that have been done on that. So the economy could be in a recession, but if the stock market keeps going higher every day, it influences people's sentiment about the future and about the prospects. And it's like, well, I know my life is tough and I have to go into debt to pay my bills, but the stock market's going up, so that means things are going to get better for me. And that's what the idea is behind using the stock market to influence people's thoughts. Again, it's this idea of perception, management of perception. Jim Sinclair had coined a term MOPE, management of perception economics, and that's exactly what's going on here. And if you look, every time, I would bet between, really going back to August, between August and now, but for sure between election night and now, I bet 80 to 90% of the time, if you watch the futures and look at graphs of the futures, the gold goes higher during Asian trading hours, and that's the physical market. That's the physical settlement market, and it starts to get hit as soon as Asia closes and London opens up, and then when New York opens up, and those are the paper markets. And so, I mean, the fact that gold moves in one direction so decidedly only when the paper markets are open is telling you they're manipulating it.
When I interviewed Bill Murphy just recently, he was saying that, price action makes market commentary. And what the powers that be are doing right now is manipulating the stock market and the gold price to make the perception that the economy is doing well. And the commentary then on the economy and Trump is that Trump is now going to be great for the economy. And that's exactly opposite to what people were talking about before the election. What just happened? It's amazing how, as Bill Murphy says, the action in the markets really shapes the commentary, and the commentary can be completely reversed just with price action in the markets. And I think Bill Murphy was talking about how the powers that be are doing this because they can't have people questioning the soundness of the system. If the stock market went down after Trump's election, people would be, oh no, the economy is going to collapse, and that they can't have that perception. They need to, because the economy is so unstable right now, but it's just being propped up by the powers that be, and they need that perception to continue. Otherwise, if the perception and the commentary stops being good for the economy, then the game's over.
That's exactly right, and that kind of gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning here, that it's the whole goal right now is to manage and shape the perception of the public about what's going on, and market manipulation, the way they're manipulating the markets, is just another form of propaganda, because it's being used as a tool to try and influence how you feel about everything. And that's again, at its starkest level, it's Orwell's thought police.
Definitely. And one thing that maybe we could end on is, what is your perspective on how people should look at news nowadays? I mean, you can't really trust the mainstream media, and a lot of the alternative media is really good, but at the same time, you can't trust everything you read on the internet, obviously. People can write whatever they want. So how do people distinguish between news that is real and stuff that people just made up?
Sure. The problem is, it kind of takes a lot of work to determine what you throw out and what you keep. And probably a good rule of thumb is, if you're looking at the mainstream media, what they report, I would probably throw out 80 to 90% of what they report, or at least do your own investigating of it. So, and same thing with the alternative media. There's a lot of crap out there, and I know for myself, when I read something that I find to be interesting or significant or relevant, and it doesn't matter where I read it, I search around for at least a couple other sources that are going to corroborate that, and not sources that quote the source that I just read. You get a lot of blogs out there that pull up Zero Hedge, and then they basically regurgitate what they read on Zero Hedge. But if you dig into like the Zero Hedge articles, a lot of times they'll have credible source references like Reuters or other reliable publications, and so it's not an easy thing to do, and that's why it's easy for them to get away with using the mainstream media to shape perception. Because most people, when they get their news, they turn on the news at 10 o'clock and listen to the news and, oh, that's the news, or they turn on CNN, or they turn on Fox News. And all of those sources are just horrible sources to base your knowledge base and your perception about what's going on. The information from those sites, collectively, it's not credible. So if you really want to be educated and aware of what might really be going on, it takes a lot of work. And the people who do it and who put out the credible alternative media websites, they spend all of their time doing it. I mean, I spend a lot of time surfing around for what I think is actually, at least some semblance of truthful news. And there's guys out there, well, Rory Hall, the Daily Coin. I mean, from the moment he gets up until he goes to bed, I mean, he's surfing around to try and find sources that are reliable and that make sense. So, and I don't think you'll see any of us quoting any of the big mainstream media sources because they're not reliable anymore. I mean, the Washington Post is a perfect example. When I was growing up, that was a go-to newspaper for foreign affairs, for just about anything. And same with the New York Times. Well, now the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, and we've seen what a beast he is. So I mean, for people who really want to try and understand what's going on, it's something that you got to spend some time on. You can't just pull up, one or two of your favorite alternative media websites and use that as your basis for your knowledge. Just like you can't turn on CNN and say, "Oh, that's what's really going on." Geez, all these websites are Russian propaganda tools.
All right. Well, Dave Kranzler, thank you so much for giving us your time today and sharing your insights. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you online and any last thoughts you had?
Sure. My website, my Russian propaganda tool website is Investment Research Dynamics, and I try to post at least something interesting, at least that I find interesting, once a day. And lately, I've had some guest posts that have been I've been fortunate enough to have them giving me their work, and no, they're not Russian operatives. And then from my website, I offer a short sellers journal and a mining stock journal, and they're subscription, very reasonably priced subscription newsletters. The short sellers journal is once a week, and the mining stock journal is every other week. And so I offer those research products off of my website.
Once again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Elijah. Always a pleasure.